hate crimes. In 2016, there was 1,409 hate crimes in Canada and 6,121 in the United States. Now, the United States FBI defines a hate crime as a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. So what does all that mean? Let's break it down a little bit. A hate crime is any crime that is driven by hatred of the victim. Now, hate itself is not a crime, as that would violate personal freedoms, which can include things like freedom of speech. But when there is an action paired with the hatred, that's where we see hate crimes arise. Now, again, in 2016, there was 1,409 hate crimes in Canada and 6,121 in the United States. And this number continues to grow each year, although it is not required that either nation report these values. So let's break that down. In the United States in particular, hate crimes were due to 57% due to race, 21% due to religion, 17% due to sexual orientation, 3.7% due to language, disability, age, and gender. And in Canada, they were due to 48% towards race, 33% against religion, 33% sexual orientation, and 6% language, disability, age, and gender. So let's look at the history. Now, according to my research and the internet, the first documented hate crime, although it wasn't called it at the time, was in 64 AD by the Roman Emperor Nero. Now, basically, in 64 AD, a fire broke out, destroying portions of the city of Rome, which then also led and affected the economy. Now, a lot of folks suspected that Nero himself was actually the arsonist that started this whole thing, and Nero felt he was being blamed for the damage which he said he didn't start. So he shifted the guilt to the Christians and called for anyone who followed this religion to be punished. And this led to years of hate crimes against anyone who followed the beliefs of Christianity, as well as several other religious groups. Now, one of the most well-known examples our world faced was during World War II. In the mid-1940s, when Hitler and the Nazis tortured and murdered 6 million Jews simply because of their religious faith. And of course, more recently, the shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue. Now, for me, the first time that I experienced a hate crime is when I was in grade 12 in high school with Matthew Shepard. Matthew Shepard was a university student in my home state who was at a bar. Two gentlemen offered to drive him home, but they didn't take him home. They lit him out to the middle of nowhere. They beat him beyond recognition. They tied him to a split-pole fence, and they left him for dead in the freezing cold. The next morning, someone came riding on their bike through the desert and came across what they thought to be a scarecrow tied to a fence, but when they got closer, they realized that it was a human, and they could tell because where Matthew had been crying, it had washed the blood away. Matthew was taken to a local hospital, where a few days later, he passed away. Matthew Shepard was murdered and the victim of a hate crime because of his sexual orientation and because he was gay. And that, for me, is the first time where I discovered that simply just by being yourself, you could be targeted for a crime and be murdered for it. Now, prior to Matthew Shepard's death, hate crime laws did not protect against crimes based on sexual orientation or gender. And it wasn't until 10 years later, after the death of Matthew Shepard, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009. Now, this national act helps state and local governments to investigate and prosecute hate crimes in any form. Now, this was a huge deal to the LGBTQ community, as it finally protects the crimes motivated by sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. Hate crimes are unique because they have the power to terrorize entire communities. The victim is only one of the many individuals affected by the crime itself. Now, as we saw with the recent shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue, that the individuals in attendance were greatly impacted by the attack, but the entire Jewish community is feeling the immense pain of an attack against their own brothers and sisters. Now, this community is about 7 million individuals in the United States alone who are now fearful to participate in worship in the same way as they have for many years. And although the community has banded together to stand strong against hate crimes, they still remember all of the acts of hatred against them forever. That is a part of them. Now, to learn a little bit more about hate crimes and someone who's been affected by them, I want to introduce you to my good friend, Scott Jones. All right, folks, so we are here with my friend Scott Jones, who is the subject of an incredible documentary, Love, Scott. But Scott, what I would first, thank you for agreeing to come and hang out with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Appreciate it. Scott and I actually met virtually, and then we met in person through my dear friend Simona. And that's sort of how we connected. And Scott, we've been talking in this video sort of about hate crimes, and I know that's something that you have experienced. And so I'm wondering if you can just tell the folks a bit of your story and sort of how you ended up to where you are.
Sure. So about 5 years ago, I was out celebrating my friend Andy's art gallery opening in a small town called New Glasgow, Nova Scotia.
Which is in Canada.
In Canada,
yeah.
The East Coast. And when I was walking down the street with my arm around his shoulder, a man attacked me. He stabbed me in the back, and one of those stab wounds went through my spine. And I believe, because I encountered him earlier in the night, that I was targeted because of my sexual orientation. And
you identify as gay?
Yes, I do. And since that attack, I started an anti-homophobia and transphobia campaign called Don't Be Afraid, which is on Facebook. And that has kind of led me to where I am now in Toronto. And through that process, I also did a film with my friend Laura Marie Wayne while she was a filmmaker, and she followed this journey of kind of grief and trauma in relation to a hate crime.
Yeah, which it's really beautiful, and I can't wait for folks to be able to see it when it's like out. I saw it here in Toronto. So Scott, can you take us through a little bit of like what that experience was like for you, from when the attack happened to sort of get to the point where you wanted to make a film and talk about it with your friend?
Sure. So initially, after I was attacked, I did express to the police that I thought I was targeted because of being gay, but the first few months were really devoted to my recovery, and my family was kind of immersed in the healthcare system, and we didn't have the energy to kind of keep on the police and tell them to keep it, like, investigating it as a hate crime. And my friend Laura knew that part of the story just wasn't going to be told, and so and in the media they were picking up more of the positive, so that the anti-homophobia campaign and me responding to this hate crime with positivity, and that was true and is true, but was only part of the story. And so Laura, as the documentarian, captured kind of the darker side of it, my pain and my grief, and this whole question of why did the police not truly investigate it as a hate crime, and explore why he did this, which I think is a huge part of the learning process from all of this.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, it's even at the sentencing, it was just classified as attempted murder, and it wasn't classified as an actual hate crime. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So does that bother you? Because I feel bothered by it, just knowing the little pieces that I know about you, or have you sort of made peace with that, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what bothered me so much about the attempted murder charge was that I knew that the police and the Crown Attorney were happy with that because it carried a longer sentence, and he pleaded guilty to that charge, and which I'm really grateful for, because this could have gone on and been way more painful than it was. But the sentence that he received, people were happy or outraged about the 10-year sentence for attempted murder, and I really was just thinking, none of this is going to bring back my ability to walk, but where is the learning in all of this? How are we going to move on from this and work through this? And for me, the piece of the puzzle that was missing is that hate crime charge, even a hate crime investigation, the police showing the community, that the queer community, that they believe them and that they will take it seriously.
Do you think that's something that you would eventually go back and try to push for? Is that an option?
No, I mean, not at that level or in that court system. I think I could charge him personally, but I think that's way too much energy, and I think the film is really opening up this discussion around hate crime laws, and we have these laws, and since 1996, sexual orientation has been included under hate crime law.
Wow.
But since then, of the thousands of cases, only 10 have been ruled as being motivated on, how do I word that, as being motivated by hate towards the queer community. So there's a huge gap, and I think that's a big problem in Canadian law. We need to use these laws, we need to listen to these marginalized communities and really know how to investigate these crimes.
Yeah. What I found interesting when we were doing research is that neither the United States or Canada are obligated to present their numbers of hate crimes to the world. So, and Canadians' numbers obviously a little bit lower than the United States, I think, just due to sheer population. But the one thing that I did learn is that you guys are a bit ahead in that regard. At least in 1996, as you said, sexual orientation was thrown in under the hate crime law. But in the United States, President Obama didn't pass anything until 2009.
Which is insanity.
Right? I know. So because part of me is like, we don't hear about it in Canada and we know that it happens. But I was also a bit impressed that the laws are there, but as you just said, even if they're there, they're not always exercised or used to...
Well, I mean, look at the team of people in New Glasgow that were responsible for investigating this crime. Most of them are straight white men and don't have any experience with marginalization. So how will they have the tools to explore and investigate crimes motivated by hate? That particular communities, marginalized communities, feel were instigated by hate. So yeah, it's a big problem.
How did your attack affect your community?
Nova Scotian communities are so tightly knit, and this is a small town, and it was outrage, it was shock, it was fear, it was love, wanting to help me, wanting to support me, and I think public opinion was that this was motivated by hate, but again, that didn't translate into the court system. But in terms of the community support, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of love and compassion. But as you know, these things come in waves, and when they happen, there's all this discussion, and then as time goes by, it kind of dies away.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of advocacy to keep these discussions going in smaller communities.
For sure.
And if we look at Matthew Shepard's case, his parents have been non-stop advocating
100%.
all over the world.
Yeah, which has been pretty powerful. So now, sort of where you are now, what's sort of next? How do you keep that conversation going, or is that something that you want to keep going? And sort of what are you focusing on now when it comes to sort of your experience?
So, the last 5 years have been mostly devoted to advocating for the queer community in particular, and that has been very therapeutic for me. Turning to advocacy after such a hateful attack and with drastic repercussions.
Yeah. What does that look like, though? What does advocacy look like from your perspective? Like, what do you do?
Okay, so I'm a choir director, and under the Don't Be Afraid campaign, we started a choir for social change called Vox in Halifax. And for a few years, we looked at social issues, not just queer discrimination, but many things. So we tackled themes like rape culture and misogyny, sex positivity, mental health, and queer discrimination. And we used our music to kind of delve into these topics and then kind of open people up to the message in an event or a concert.
That's awesome.
And so now I'm in Toronto, kind of exploring at U of T. My PhD research is on choir as an agent for social change. So
Which is so awesome.
yeah, it's really, really cool.
That's awesome. What do you hope Or what would you want young people to do, specifically that are watching, with this idea of hate crimes, and what do you think there are some things that they can do?
I mean, the main thing is to keep talking about it and advocating in that way, just through discussion and helping the majority see that marginalized experiences of discrimination are real and they need to be investigated and explored in order to bring about change. That's the first one. And then I think art is an incredible medium for change, and in any form. And I'm seeing now how powerful film is. So creating art that can start those discussions is an incredibly therapeutic way to tackle this problem, or just sharing art, things you've read or seen or heard that are powerful to you, recommending them to friends or to people who have different viewpoints.
That's awesome. Scott, I really appreciate you taking the time to come share a bit of your story. It is very powerful, and thank you for the advocacy work that you do. I think it could be really easy to take some time after something that big, and I know it's been a few years, but still to just recoup. But I think within a year you jumped back in, and it's really commendable. So thank you for the work that you're doing to bring light to this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so based on all we've learned today and heard from Scott, I bet you're wondering, realistically, what can I do to help see an end to hate crimes around the world? Well, the first thing you can do is check your own biases. What does that mean? Bias is being in favor or against one thing or group based on an opinion that is not necessarily based on reason or actual experiences. This is like hearing about the Twilight series and deciding you're Team Edward before you know anything about Team Jacob. Now, we all have them, even if we don't always see them play out in our daily lives. We need to be aware of them in order to ensure that we are not participating or encouraging acts of hatred that could lead to hate crimes. Now, once you're able to acknowledge your own biases, encourage others to do the same and people around you. Another way to help end hate crimes is through education. Now, the more you know about a culture, religion, sexual orientation, or people group, the more respect you will gain for what they believe in. Now, because then they are no longer just numbers or facts or a newspaper article, they are real people with names and goals and dreams just like everyone else. So get a group of friends together and learn more about a culture or religion you may not know much about. Now, it may seem like you are not able to make a difference, but if everyone does their part in knowing their bias and educating themselves, we can make a world of difference.